The shuttle came down wrong. Commander Elena Reyes watched it happen from the observation deck of Kepler Station. A silver teardrop trailing smoke as it tumbled out of a clear October sky over the Pacific. Council shuttles did not crash. In 11 years of guarded, formal contact, not one Council vessel had so much as clipped a cloud. Reyes was already moving before the alarm finished its first cycle, boots hammering down the corridor toward the flight deck, because the timing was wrong in a way that made her stomach drop faster than the shuttle did. The Council envoy was due to deliver Earth's 10-year review in 6 hours. Nobody crash-landed 6 hours before a review. Not by accident. She reached her interceptor in 90 seconds, which was, officially, impossible. Unofficially, it was the reason Reyes had spent the last decade pretending to fly cargo runs between the Belt and Mars, while actually running drills in a fleet the rest of the world didn't know existed. She dropped in the cockpit, threw the canopy shut, and was airborne before ground control finished clearing her. "Talk to me," she said. "Envoy shuttle, single occupant confirmed, no distress beacon," said the voice in her ear. "Priya Anand, mission control. Calm the way people got when they were refusing to panic on purpose. Engine signature reads clean. Elena, this wasn't mechanical. Something forced that thing down. Weapons fire, no burn marks, no debris field. It's like the ship just stopped believing in itself." Reyes didn't like that description, mostly because it was accurate. She'd seen the readouts on Council drive technology during the last inspection tour, theoretically unjammable, running on principles Earth's physicists were still arguing about. Something had reached into that shuttle systems and switched it off from the inside. She found it half buried in a fallow wheat field outside Lincoln, Nebraska, hull ticking as it cooled. One landing strut folded like a broken finger. Local authorities had already thrown a perimeter around it, all very calm, all very rehearsed, because Earth had spent 10 years rehearsing exactly this kind of calm. Reyes landed beside the wreck and popped her canopy into air that smelled like ozone and turned soil. The envoy climbed out under his own power, which surprised her. Threl Vask was old for his species, silver-skinned and slight, the kind of Council diplomat sent to a developing world because his career could survive an insult and the Council's pride couldn't. He looked at Reyes, then at the interceptor she'd arrived in, and something in his long face rearranged itself. "That is not," he said, in careful Earth standard, "a mining shuttle." "No," Reyes agreed. "It isn't. How fast can it go?" "Faster than your review is going to like." Threl didn't answer that. Instead, he reached into his flight suit, produced a data slate with a cracked corner, and held it out to her with both hands, the way a man hands over something he's carried a long way and doesn't want to drop now that he's arrived. "I was not shot down by accident, Commander," he said. "And I was not shot down by your people. I need to speak to whoever runs this planet's actual government, not the one that smiles at our summits. Today, before the review." Reyes took the slate. On it, still loading, was a Council resolution stamped with a seal she recognized from 10 years of study. The Assembly Chamber, highest authority in known space. The header alone told her more than she wanted to know. Emergency session, classification review. Sol system. Proposed status. Feral Cradle World. Containment priority 1. She had been trained for exactly one thing her entire adult life, and it was this. She just hadn't expected it to start in a wheat field. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. 11 years earlier, a piece of Council hardware the size of a city block had come apart over Ganymede, and nobody on either side had ever fully explained why. The official Council record called it an accident. A survey drone malfunctioning on a routine pass through an unclaimed system, burning up in the moon's thin atmosphere before anyone could recover more than debris. The official human record said much the same thing, because at the time humanity had no way to say anything else. What the official record did not say was that 8% of that drone survived the fall intact, that a joint NASA-ESA salvage crew reached it 14 hours before any Council retrieval team arrived, and that the crew's leader, a stubborn, quietly furious materials engineer named Tomas Reyes, made a decision that reshaped the next decade of his planet's history before anyone in Geneva had signed off on it. He copied everything: alloy composition, drive geometry, The strange lattice housing that would later turn out to be a rudimentary, inertial dampener 2 generations ahead of anything Earth had built. He copied it in the 14 hours he had, handed the data to 3 people he trusted absolutely, and then helped the Council retrieval team load the wreckage aboard their ship with an expression of perfect, practiced innocence. Nobody ordered him to do it. That was the detail that mattered later, when the review boards asked. Tomas Reyes had looked at a piece of alien technology sitting unguarded on a moon 8 light minutes from home, and made a bet that his species would rather be judged for lying than be caught defenseless. 10 years and one daughter's entire military career later, that bet had built 160 ships hidden inside a cover story about asteroid mining, and a fleet of engineers who had spent a decade quietly turning stolen physics into something that could, if it ever had to, hold a line. The Council had spent those same 10 years running trade missions and compliance reviews on a world it believed was still working out the fundamentals of orbital construction. It was, in its own way, a remarkably human kind of mistake, assuming that the last version of someone you met is the only version that exists. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. 200 light years away, in a chamber built from light and consensus rather than stone, Counselor Masil Verent was making the case that humanity had already declared war. Earth simply hadn't noticed yet. They have watched us for a decade, Verent said, and the chamber's translation field carried her voice into 40 languages at once, under the fiction of trade negotiation, while quietly reverse engineering every scrap of wreckage recovered from the Ganymede incident. Independent verification confirms it. Human orbital forges are producing alloys that should be a century beyond their metallurgy. Their so-called asteroid mining fleet emits drive signatures inconsistent with any registered mining vessel in this quadrant. Threll Vask's seat sat empty in the gallery, and Verent made sure everyone noticed it. Envoy Vask was to deliver Earth's compliance review this cycle. He has not arrived. I do not believe that is coincidence. I believe Sol System has moved to eliminate Council oversight before their capabilities can be fully assessed. And I believe, colleagues, that we have a closing window in which to respond before that assessment becomes impossible. It was a good speech. It was also mostly true, which was the part that would matter later. Humanity had been building a fleet in secret. Humanity had reverse-engineered Council technology from a ship that crashed into Jupiter's largest moon 11 years earlier, an accident the Council itself had never adequately explained. What Verent did not mention, because she did not yet know it, was that her own faction's Ordnance Division had quietly ordered Threll Vask's shuttle disabled that morning to ensure his moderate report never reached the floor and to make sure the vote she wanted happened on schedule. The motion to authorize a containment fleet passed by 11 votes. Not unanimous. Not close either. Councillor Branham Idessa, senior of the small moderate bloc, watched the tally light up red across the board and felt something colder than politics settle into her chest. She had visited Earth twice. She had eaten a meal cooked by human hands in a human kitchen and been told a joke she still didn't fully understand, but had laughed at anyway because the woman telling it had laughed first. She did not believe Earth was hiding a weapon. She believed Earth was hiding a mirror, and the Council did not like what it showed. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Reyes did not take the slate to the United Nations. She took it to a bunker 300 meters under the Nevada desert that officially did not exist, to a room where 11 people who ran the actual decisions of Earth's defense were finishing their coffee and had no idea their morning was about to end. Director Amara Osei read the resolution twice out loud, so the room could hear exactly how the Council's lawyers had phrased humanity's death sentence. Containment Priority 1. The Chamber's own bylaws defined it plainly, once you knew where to look. Full orbital blockade, forced technological audit, and if resistance was detected, sterilization of the anomaly. They're calling us an anomaly, said General Tomas Reyes, Elena's father, and not coincidentally, the man who had spent a decade building the fleet his daughter now flew for. After 10 years of trade talks, after we let them walk through our cities. They're calling us that because we lied to them, Osei said, not unkindly. We built a war fleet behind a cover story, same as we planned to from day one. The only surprise is that they figured it out before we wanted them to. The Ganymede wreck wasn't our fault, Tomas said. No, but everything we did after it was our choice. Osei set the slate down. 10 years ago, we decided we'd rather be caught strong than found weak. That decision comes due today. Elena Reyes stood at the back of the room, still in her flight suit, and said the thing nobody else wanted to say first. The envoy in the field isn't a hostage. He's evidence. Somebody in their government shot him down to keep him from talking, and he came here anyway. That means there's a faction on their side that doesn't want this war either. She looked at Osei. If we come out swinging, we prove Verent right in front of the whole council. If we hide, they bombard an empty threat, and we lose everything we built for nothing. There's a third option, which is, we let them see exactly what we are. All of it. Every ship, every yard, every weapon. And then we don't fire first. Elena's voice didn't shake, though something under her ribs did. We make the blockade choose, in full view of their own cameras, whether they're here to contain a threat or to slaughter people who never raised a hand against them. Nobody in the room liked it. Nobody had a better idea, either. Osei walked the length of the table twice before she spoke again, the way she always did when a decision was about to become irreversible. If we do this and it fails, she said, we've handed them a live map of every ship we own, right before they open fire on all of them at once. There's no version of this plan where we get to take it back. There's no version of any plan where we get to take it back, General Reyes said. We stopped having that option the day we pulled wreckage off Ganymede. Elena's right about one thing. We built this fleet to be found eventually. The only question left is what they see when they find it. And if the moderates on their side lose the argument anyway, if Verent gets her vote and the fleet opens fire regardless of what we broadcast. Elena answered before her father could. Then at least the last thing that Chamber sees is the truth. Instead of a lie, they told themselves to make the killing easier. I'd rather lose that way than win the other one. It was not a comfortable thing to say out loud, and nobody in the room pretended otherwise. But Osei had spent 30 years reading rooms for a living, and she recognized the particular silence that settled after Elena finished speaking, the sound of 11 people quietly agreeing to something none of them wanted to be right about. She called the vote anyway, because procedure mattered even in a bunker 300 meters under Nevada, and it passed unanimously. Within the hour, encrypted orders went out to every shipyard, hidden mining platform, and disguised fleet berth from the belt to the Trojan asteroids. Stand down from cover, hold formation, and wait. 10 years of careful invisibility ended not with an announcement, but with 160 transponders quietly switching from false registries to their real names, one at a time, like a held breath finally let out. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The Council blockade fleet arrived at the edge of the Sol system 11 days later. 41 warships, arranged with the patient geometry of a species that had never lost a first contact war, sliding into formation just past the orbit of Neptune. Their sensors returned exactly what Verent had promised, a human deterrent fleet of 160 vessels, camouflaged for a decade as mining haulers and survey ships, now uncloaked and holding position between the blockade and the inner planets. It should have been a massacre in either direction. Instead, for 6 hours, nothing happened at all. Admiral Threkasa, commanding the Council fleet, sat in his flag chair and studied a species that had built a war machine large enough to matter, and then simply parked it, weapons cold. Transponders broadcasting a single looping message on every frequency his ships could receive. We built this because we were afraid of you. We are not going to use it first. They're bluffing, said his tactical officer. They're not, said Threl Vask, who had insisted on riding back with the fleet as a witness, and whose testimony about the Nebraska bunker had already thrown 3 Council factions into open argument. I sat in a room with the people who decided this. They are terrified, Admiral. They have simply chosen to be terrified in a straight line instead of a circle. Asa did not fully understand the phrase, but he understood the tactical picture well enough. 160 ships, weapons cold, in a system full of 11 billion civilians who had no idea any of this was happening above their heads. Somewhere in that arrangement was either the greatest bluff in the history of first contact, or the first honest thing his government had been shown by an unvetted species in 300 years. For 6 hours, the two fleets simply watched each other, and on the ground, humanity kept living. Traffic moved through Lagos and Jakarta and Sao Paulo. A ferry crossed the strait between Seattle and Bainbridge Island on schedule. None of it made the news, because the news didn't know yet, and that silence was its own kind of weapon. A species large enough to build a war fleet in secret was also large enough to keep 11 billion people calm while it stood at the edge of annihilation. Only a few hundred people on the planet understood what was hanging over their heads at any given moment, and every one of them had spent a decade training for exactly this kind of quiet. Asa found that harder to process than the ships. His own homeworld would have panicked within the hour. Markets would have failed, governments would have fractured over who to blame, and half his species would have known within minutes that a war fleet was parked at the edge of their sky. Humanity had built the capacity to hide an existential threat from itself, and Asa was no longer certain whether that made them more trustworthy or considerably less. He gave the order to hold position and open a channel. Varant's faction back on the Council homeworld did not wait for his report. Word of the standoff, and of Threl Vask's very public accusations, had already split the assembly floor into 3 shouting camps, and Varant, watching her carefully engineered war stall into a staring contest, made the decision that would end her career and very nearly end the peace at the same time. She ordered a strike wing to break formation and fire on the human flagship without Asa's authorization. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Elena Reyes felt the shot before Priya's voice reached her. A hard flare on her tactical display that meant one council cruiser had gone rogue and put a full spread into the human command carrier's shields. The bridge around her went silent in the particular way rooms go silent right before someone starts screaming orders, and for one full second Elena understood, with total clarity, that this was the moment the last 10 years had been built for. She did not give the order to fire back. "Hold," she said, loud enough to carry down every open channel on the ship. "All batteries, hold fire." "Say again, hold." "Elena, we're taking hits." I said hold. Her hands were steady on the console, even though nothing else in her was. "Shields are up. Nobody's dead. If we return fire right now, every camera in this system shows humanity shooting first, and it doesn't matter that we didn't start it. Hold the line, and let them see who actually pulled the trigger." It was the longest 90 seconds of her life. The rogue cruiser fired twice more before 3 council ships from Asa's own formation moved to physically block its line of fire. Weapons trained not on the human fleet, but on their own rogue captain. And Admiral Threk Asa's voice came through on an open channel loud enough for both fleets and, within the hour, half the council homeworld to hear. "Stand down," he said, "or I will fire on you myself." The rogue cruiser stood down. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. While the 2 fleets held their uneasy silence at the edge of the solar system, Branham Idessa was 3 sectors away, doing something considerably less dramatic and, in the long run, far more dangerous, reading procurement records. She had not believed Varent's story from the moment it was presented, not because it was implausible. Everything Varent said about the human fleet turned out, embarrassingly, to be accurate, but because of what the story left out. A single-occupant diplomatic shuttle did not simply stop believing in itself, as the human commander had so aptly put it. Council drive systems carried 17 layers of redundancy, specifically because a hostile actor disabling one from a distance was supposed to be theoretically impossible. Theoretically was doing a great deal of work in that sentence, and Idessa had spent enough decades in the assembly to know that impossible things reliably had a budget line hidden somewhere behind them. She found it on the 4th day, buried 3 requisition levels beneath Varent's own ordnance division. A single authorization, filed under a research designation, so innocuous it had nearly slipped past her, for the deployment of an experimental drive suppression field to a shuttle corridor above the Pacific Ocean. Filed 6 hours before Threl Vask's shuttle went down. Signed, in the small, precise hand Idessa recognized from 30 years of shared committee work, by Masil Varent. Varent had not simply lied about the threat. She had manufactured the emergency that let her frame the vote, disabled the one envoy likely to argue for restraint, and then, when even that failed to produce the war she wanted, ordered a strike wing to start one anyway. Idessa sat with the record open in front of her for a long time before she copied it, encrypted it 3 separate ways, and sent it to exactly one person she trusted not to bury it. It reached the assembly floor 40 minutes before the censure vote. It was not, in the end, the deciding piece of evidence, the footage of a human medic handing a council soldier something warm to drink had already done most of that work on its own. But it was the piece that turned Varent's fall from a policy defeat into something closer to an ending. And it was the piece that convinced even the most stubborn holdouts in the moderate bloc that the danger the council had spent a decade preparing for had never been the one wearing a human face. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. What happened over the next 72 hours would be studied by both species for a generation, and neither side would ever fully agree on which parts had been strategy and which had simply been mercy that turned out to work. Humanity did not press the advantage. Instead, Elena's fleet opened rescue channels for the crew of the rogue cruiser, treated their wounded in human medical bays alongside human casualties, and broadcast the footage, unedited, translated into every council language available, across the same frequencies Varent's faction had used to sell the containment vote. They did not broadcast their weapon specs. They did not broadcast their numbers. They broadcast a council medic, hands shaking, being handed a cup of something warm by a human corpsman who didn't speak a word of his language and didn't need to. Director Osei, watching the footage go out from the bunker in Nevada, finally understood what her daughter had built the plan around. Not deterrence. Proof. The rest of Earth found out 4 hours later, when the footage humanity had aimed at the council assembly leaked, inevitably, back into the planet's own news networks. There was no controlled announcement, no carefully worded address from a head of state easing 11 billion people into the knowledge that they had spent a decade, one bad vote away from extinction. There was just a video of a human medic and a frightened alien soldier playing on every screen from Toronto to Manila within the same hour, with no context attached except a caption someone in the newsroom had written in 5 stun minutes. This is happening now, above your heads, and has been for 10 years. What followed was not the panic Osei had spent a decade planning around. There was fear, plenty of it, and no shortage of furious questions about who had authorized a secret war fleet without so much as a public vote. But underneath the anger ran something Osei hadn't fully budgeted for, a strange, stubborn pride, the kind that showed up in vigils, held outside shipyards nobody had known existed the day before, in strangers standing in city squares simply to look up at a sky that had, it turned out, been quietly defended the entire time. Tomas Reyes watched a live broadcast from a crowd gathered outside the Lincoln Memorial and said nothing for a long time. And when he finally spoke, it was only to say that he hadn't expected to still be alive for this part. On the council homeworld, Branham Idessa stood on the assembly floor and read Varent's unauthorized strike order into the record, then read the casualty count from the human medical bay, 0, into the record beside it, and let the 2 numbers sit next to each other until the chamber went quiet enough to hear them both. They had 160 warships, Idessa said, built in secret, aimed at our fleet, and they chose restraint over retaliation when we fired first. Councillor Varent asked this chamber to authorize sterilizing a species for the crime of preparing to defend itself. I would like the record to show precisely what that species did with the fleet we accuse them of building for conquest. The vote to censure Varent and recall the containment fleet passed with room to spare. It was not unanimous. Nothing involving Earth ever was again. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. 6 weeks later, Elena Reyes stood in the same wheat field outside Lincoln where it had all started, watching the ground crew finish repairs on Threl Vask's shuttle before its return flight. The envoy had asked to see the crash site one more time before the formal negotiations began. Real negotiations this time, with humanity seated at the table not as a subject species under review, but as something the council had never quite had a category for. Your General Reyes tells me you argued for restraint in that command room, Threl said, watching the last of the golden light drop over the field. He says you were the only voice pushing against retaliation. I was the only voice who understood what we were actually trying to win, Elena said. A fight we could have had that any day for 10 years. What we needed was for somebody like you to stand in a chamber full of your own people and tell them what you saw. That only works if what you saw was true. Threll considered that for a long moment, silver face unreadable in the fading light. My government still does not entirely trust yours. Good, Elena said. We don't entirely trust you either. That's not where trust starts. It's just where the shooting stopped. She looked past him, out toward the horizon where the last interceptors from her decade-long secret fleet were finally, publicly, coming home in daylight, engines bright against a sky that had stopped needing to hide anything. 10 years of pretending to be smaller than they were had ended not with a war humanity won, but with one it had refused to start. And for the first time since the Ganymede wreck fell out of the sky, Elena Reyes let herself believe that had been the entire point all along. The Council had come to Earth expecting to find a threat worth sterilizing. What it found instead was a species that had built the power to burn its way onto the assembly floor and chosen, when the moment came, to knock. Threll's shuttle lifted off an hour later, repaired well enough for the short hop back to the transfer station in lunar orbit, and Elena stood in the flattened wheat until its lights disappeared into the dark. She thought about the version of that morning where she'd been 30 seconds slower reaching the crash site, or where the rogue cruiser's third shot had found something softer than shields, or where Osei had called the vote the other way. There had been 100 places along the last 6 weeks where the story could have ended in fire instead of a diplomat watching a sunset. She did not think restraint had been the safe choice. She thought it had simply been the only one worth having built a fleet to protect. Her father found her there 20 minutes later, hands in his coat pockets, looking older than she'd ever let herself notice before. Branham Idessa sent something through this morning, Tomas said. Formal request. She wants to visit the salvage site on Ganymede. Says she wants to see where this actually started, before either of us decided how to finish it. What did you tell her? That I'd meet her there myself. He looked out at the field, at the shallow scar the shuttle had cut into the soil, already starting to soften under 6 weeks of rain. 10 years ago, I stood on that moon and made a choice for a species that hadn't voted on it yet. I've been waiting a long time to find out whether I was right. Elena thought about the footage of a council medics shaking hands, about 160 ships holding their fire in the dark, about a chamber 200 light years away, where a woman she would probably never meet had risked her career reading requisition records nobody wanted read. None of it felt like winning, exactly. It felt like something slower and less satisfying and considerably more durable than that. You were right that we needed the strength, she said. We're still finding out about the rest. Above them, the last of the returning interceptors cut contrails across a sky that no longer needed to explain itself to anyone. And for the first time in 10 years, nobody on the ground looked up to check what they might be hiding.